Hello, everybody. My name is David Hatwell. I'm the president of Aegis Project Controls. Today, we're going to talk about the COVID-19 impacts as we see it through construction. We have over 30 years of experience dealing with these types of issues and impacts. Primarily, we see force majeure along a huge range of impacts, dealing from hurricane weather all the way through other government actions. This is COVID-19 is a very unusual situation we have here. It may or may not be covered as a force majeure. There are some things we know we can do, and there's some things that we recommend that you can do, and we're going to walk through all of that. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Russ Wodiska. I'm going to act as the color commentator throughout, and Russ will provide much of the details.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Dave. Share my screen here. Welcome, everybody. Dave talked about, there's a lot of information that we're getting from, we're being really bombarded about COVID-19. Most of this is really from a health standpoint, but we're really trying to address this issue from a health of your project, from your business, and how you have to deal with this as a professional. This is not to say that the health issues aren't paramount, and they certainly need to be dealt with first and foremost, but this is really to focus on the health of your project. That said, I think that we can collectively overcome this, and if we show care and compassion for each other, we'll get through this as a country. We're going to break this into 6 major sections. I'm going to shoot to make this 45 minutes. I'm going to try to do a little faster if possible, but it's going to all depend on what kind of questions we get at the end of this. We're not going to take questions right now, but if you type them in the chat room, we're going to try to monitor that a little bit, and we'll go to that at the end to take questions at that point. What we're going to go over here, a lot of this is common sense, though I hope you will come away from this learning something. This presentation is targeted towards a general audience because we have so many people on right now. But if you do have a specific question, you really should, we'll give you avenues to reach out to me directly. If you are already working with Aegis on the project control side, they're just a great resource to reach out to first. Just as a prelude to what we're talking about, we're going to go over this in 5 major sections. Force majeure, immediate steps that the contractor should take, schedules and analysis, what we need to do with regard to those, other actions, and then really future mitigation. So let's see that this is the organization we're going to follow through on. So this is just a general point. We're broken into several parts at Aegis, but primarily we're a project controls company. I manage the risk portion of it, but really in this situation, not just COVID-19, really all disputes that I work with, the foundation is really good project controls. That's always the case. This is something that I believe in fervently, but in this instance with COVID-19, all these best practices really become even more important because the data is really going to drive this whole process. So similarly, keeping good project controls data is always the answer. We handle all different types of information as it comes into the risk department. Some of them are handled by Aegis, some are not. We have to deal with whatever data set you have, and we have to work with that. But really the ones that are the most successful, if it does go into the risk department or the dispute department, the ones that are really most successful are those that adhere to the best practices in project controls. So this is true for not just this dispute, but as you're going through various issues in the future, and just important to remember. So we're going to start with force majeure. COVID-19 is potentially, and I stress that word potentially, a force majeure event. This is typically where it would fall if there is going to be some sort of time extension. It would fall under this clause. What is it? Many of you probably already know, but it's specifically a clause in construction contracts that's designed to provide time relief and or a release from liquidated damages should any unforeseen or unavoidable event occur. You may have heard this as an act of God clause. Really, it's a vehicle for both owners and contractors to avail themselves within the contract for things that are unexpected. But there's a catch to force majeure clauses, or claims, I should say, because it's not the fault of either the contractor or the owner. These are for things that could not have been reasonably anticipated. You are eligible for an extension of, if you're able to successfully make this claim, eligible to receive an extension of time to both the contract and to the milestones, but and relief from liquidated damages if it's successful, but you're not eligible to receive compensation for extended general conditions. There's going to be some cost that you continue to have to absorb during this period. And really every contract and project is different at this point. You have some who are going to be completely shut down by this event. You're going to have some that are going to be partially and some that are largely unaffected. I'm working with a client right now who's on a 250-acre site. No one's within 2 acres of one another. The trailer is essentially empty. They're just moving dirt around. They're going to be largely unimpacted by this. But if you are going to be experiencing, some costs, both with your supervision, your cost of your trailer, et cetera, but those will not be compensated if you file a force majeure clause and are granted time extension under that clause. The reason that we say potentially, that this potentially a force majeure event is 2 things. One is because not all clauses are created equal. They all differ in some respects. They do follow a general format, but what we're going to put up here, and I'm not expecting anybody to read this, but what we're putting up here is one from the AIA document, and then also, I put up the one from the FAR. But really, they're not the same. They have portions of it that are relevant to your situation. Some of them are very specific. And in these cases, they might list things like communicable diseases, disease outbreaks, epidemics, pandemics. You see in that the FAR, it specifically lists epidemics. And why this is important, these are 1, just samples, but 2 is that historically, because of the way these clauses are written, the courts have tended to interpret them fairly narrowly. You've signed a contract prior to you beginning work, and so the understanding is that you knew what the risks were going into it. It is not a guarantee that even if you are experiencing a total shutdown that you'll be able to file a force majeure claim. But in those instances where it's not specifically defined and there's some ambiguity, definitely reach out to an attorney and they can advise you specifically about your clause. Just in terms of reference, they're typically located in the miscellaneous or the general provision section, typically at the end of the contract. So the immediate steps that you need to take are, we're going to break these into 6 different sections there. First, you're going to need to review your contract, understand your notice requirements. You need to do a schedule review and understand what you're going to do for mitigation, investigate your supply chain, keep detailed records, and if applicable, review your insurance policies. So we're going to go through each of these in some detail. So what do you need to review in your contract? We already covered the force majeure. That's going to be the main clause that you want to check on an immediate term basis. Again, just to repeat, do not immediately assume that COVID-19 is a force majeure event, though it is likely it is. You need to understand your notice requirements. I'm going to get into that on the next slide as well. But for this portion, just understand what your time limits are here. When you want an extension of time, not just for this particular issue, but this, again, just general practice, you need to know these time limits because they're very often specified directly about how much time you have. And if you don't meet those requirements, in many jurisdictions, if you completely forfeit your right to a claim, and other jurisdictions, you have to have a legal fight related to that. If it's specified in the contract that you have a time limitation, that you still need to adhere to that despite what's going on in the craziness that's going on in the world right now. Look at where it says about time impact. That's going to be generally in your scheduling specifications In this case, they'll tell you what analysis needs to be done and often the methodology. Some of them specify methodologies that they're familiar with, and you need to adhere to what the specifications say. Liquidated damages, likely for this audience, you already know what these are, but just make sure you understand what your exposure is, both on interim milestones or multiple milestones and substantial completion. Because there is, if you file a force majeure claim and you are unable to get compensation for it, this will help you make some decision, a financial decision about whether or not this is in your best interest. So let's dig into the notice provisions a little bit more deeply here. This could be a source of a whole nother presentation, just in general. But let me just go over what the intent here. The previous slide I talked about the time limits associated with it. That's very direct. But really, what the point of notice provision is it's about the intent of the clause. It really gives an owner an opportunity to make an informed decision, and it will allow them to make decisions about prioritization, how they want to spend their capital. Do they want to authorize acceleration? Do they need to get this project on a certain date, or can it wait? So you want to be noticing per the contract, and even notice future events. There is no such thing as too much notice. You can withdraw a notice. You can say, I believe I'm going to be impacted by COVID-19, and it turns out that you're not. You can rescind that notice. The idea, again, is give the owner an opportunity to get some heads up and understand what their options are and what you're seeing on the project. It also allows everybody to manage expectations. Again, not just about COVID-19, but any sort of delay. This allows an owner to say, understand where the project's at, what kind of problems you're experiencing that they're the responsibility of. And also, as I indicated, they're going to have to make some tough decisions. There are going to be projects, despite the length of this delay, which we don't know yet, where people need those projects on time. A perfect example is a school. They have specific timelines. They're going to want to open up in September of whatever year they are planned for, regardless of how this is being delayed. So that gives them information that's important, so they can go and handle the financing and what it's going to take, and understand what needs to happen to get and deliver these things on time. Currently, me and my staff are putting together a notice provision checklist and a sample. So if you are interested in receiving that specifically for COVID-19, it's the same kind of checklist that applies to force majeure, but we're working to tailor it very specifically to this particular delay because of the unknowns. If you're interested, I'll give you my contact information at the end, and we can send this out to you. I'm going to get into the mitigation part a little bit later in the presentation, but really what needs to happen as an immediate step is you want to understand your schedule and determine if it's realistic. The best thing the schedule does many things. While it helps you in the disputes in the claim world, really its power is on a contemporaneous basis. It will give you the information and act as a model to what will happen should you have impacts. So if you are inserting COVID-19 or any sort of impact, it's really important that your schedule is realistic. So if you insert an impact into a schedule that has incorrect durations or just sort of swags on those things, or you didn't really make some of those, put some of the activities in there just based on some general assumptions, you need to take a look and understand where the weaknesses of your schedule, make sure that it's robust so that it can handle various impacts. Again, always true, but in this environment, it's going to be especially true. So you're going to want to look at your activity durations, your procurement assumptions, and really importantly, as this shifts around a lot, is the labor availability. The next thing you really want to do is mitigation is going to become a really important part of this. A lot of owners are going to want to get their projects on time, as I indicated. Don't wait. Start this mitigation process and start thinking about the mitigation process really in real time. We know for most of the people listening to this, there's going to be an impact to your project of some sort based on COVID-19. Start that process now. It should be internal. I recommend that you involve your project controls consultants in this process. They know the schedule, they know the project, they know how the logic works. They can be really instrumental in this process. But look at your schedule and figure out where you can do some mitigation, and don't wait. This is now the time to start looking at, not after the impact. Because people, the owners specifically, and your bosses and everybody involved, the banks ultimately, will want to know answers. How are we going to mitigate this? So
well, I'll offer here, we cannot control, obviously, the effects of COVID-19, how long it's going to last, how long we're going to be affected. What we can do is we can control, to some extent, our own work destiny. We have an opportunity here over the next couple of weeks, maybe months, hopefully not, to take a very hard look at what we've planned in terms of remaining work, to ascertain with what we've planned, is it the best plan we can come up with? Are there strategies that we can to recover time? To really put our mental powers onto these schedules and to give them the really hard look, because we have that time to do that now. So what we're suggesting is no matter where you're at with your project, this is a really good time to look at everything that's left and to determine whether it's in good shape or not, and what you can do to control the remaining of the project, the remaining portions. Go on, Russ.
Okay. We're hearing a lot about this now. This again sort of falls under the, it's obvious, but you need to investigate your supply chain, but really take a hard look here. It's not a cursory review. Likely every assumption you made about your procurement and where things are coming from is no longer accurate. So look where the materials are coming from. This is not just on the general contracting side, but also, on the subcontractors and their obligations to provide to the project. But it's both U.S. and international. Some of the, there's going to be some impact, additional impact as it relates to international goods as they have to move through airports and port closings. Domestically, we just don't know enough right now. If your goods are coming from Seattle, you may have a real problem now, and the Midwest might be okay, but that may change, very, very shortly. If you don't already have a procurement log, again, that's always best practice. Now's the time to create one. Again, you need to know where your goods are coming from and when you expect them, and they'll be, you need to understand what your original assumptions are and then what actually happened. If you do need to go into a claim and you do need to litigate this in some way, this type of information is going to be important. But more importantly, on a contemporaneous basis, this is going to be important for you to be able to effectively deliver your job in a timely manner. Look at all your long lead items. Those are the ones that that's true on every project, but sometimes those things should just hang out there for months, and they're coming in a while. In this case, it's time to pick up the phone and find out where things are, what the expectations are, and document these. If you know something is going to be long lead item, it's going to be delayed, you can insert the fragnet now. Don't wait. If you know that something is going to take, it's expected to take 2 months, so it's going to take 3 months. In terms of best practice, do not extend that duration, but rather insert a fragnet. That'll give much more clarity to what's the cause of it, and ultimately, if you do need to go into a dispute situation, that information will be paramount.
So practical application here. We look at schedules throughout the world. Procurement logs sometime in the schedule range from nothing at all the way to each individual item broken out. If your current schedule doesn't reflect the detail that's sufficient enough to show the impact of extended procurement for any of your items that are coming from China, from around the world, this again is that opportunity to go ahead and to revise your schedule to increase the detail and granularity of the procurement section of your schedule. All right. So again, we have an opportunity to do that. Now, in any case, if you're going to make changes to a schedule, what you change has to match what was there before. You can't create a detailed procurement log and reflect a much later schedule just by breaking it out in detail. It needs to be equal to what was there before. And then after that, you would reflect the impacts of procurement by changing the durations of those items, those long lead and commodity items that have been affected. Go ahead, Russ.
So this goes along the same lines here about keeping detailed records. If again, this goes into a dispute issue or dispute space, and we do think that some of these are going to get some real pushback just because of there has to be determinations, both legal, but also how you were in fact impacted will have to be proven. Some owners, of course, will be like, yep, this is obvious, and you won't have a fight, but we do expect that these will be litigated going forward. One of the things you need to do now to assist yourself in that circumstances is really track your manpower, materials, and your production. What the goal will ultimately be, if you are in a dispute, is to establish a measured mile calculation. This is the gold standard of loss of productivity, and essentially what it's trying to capture is what was your productivity at what was your actual productivity on the project prior to the impact, and then what was your productivity during that actual impact, and the delta between those two is your loss of productivity. But to be able to do this analysis, you need data, and it's one of the, while it's simple in concept, one of the real limitations to being able to perform this is the ability to have data. So we need to take the time to understand and establish what our pre-COVID-19 productions and rates were, and our staffing level, and what the equipment and material availability were. And then as this changes, this needs to be tracked so we understand. And what you're looking for in terms of information is your type of work, where it was performed, and by that I mean where on the project site it was performed. If it's done in the the east wing, I want that to be ideally documented versus we just did work. But where it is, as specific as you can be, because you can make a comparison. Most of the time, you must make a comparison based on actually where the work occurred. So you want to track that, the physical units, and the inputs and the hours. We get all different types of daily reports. Some are fantastic, others less so. But what we see often is that just because of the nature of construction and busy days, and everybody's got their own deadlines in the best of times, we see a lot of copy and paste. It just says poured concrete, and you see that for a month and a half. That's a really hard set of documents to work with if you're going to try to be pursuing a claim of any kind. So understand what your material, your equipment, and labor is being used on the site, and be specific. What I indicated before was that every contract has their own standards. So you should track all this information regardless, but each project will have to overcome whatever their current standard is in their contract. And typically words that we see are things like, was the performance impossible, commercially impractical, or commercially unreasonable? This again should be defined in your project's force majeure clause.
So a couple of practical takeaways from here. Right off the bat, take a look at your daily reports. I can tell you this with almost complete certainty. COVID-19, in addition to having delayed components and material shortages and impacts, there will be productivity impacts. You will not have as many men showing up to the site, or you'll have a subcontractor not showing up at all. In order to fully capture productivity impacts, as Russ said, we need a measured mile, which means you need to have very good detailed daily reports. So today, look at your daily reports and determine whether they capture enough information to do a before and after analysis of productivity on the trades that are going to be affected. Go ahead, Russ.
Yeah. This last one is review your insurance policies. This will not apply to everybody. Not everyone has business interruption insurance, but or coverage. This would be a vehicle potentially, and that's a big capital letters, potentially, ability to recoup some of the cost if you have this kind of coverage. These are very complex policies, what's covered, what's not. And in this case, we definitely recommend you reach out to an attorney if you want to make this some sort of claim based on insurance. This is complicated and really nuanced, not something you want to take on your own. But my recommendation, as always, is to do this as soon as possible, since understanding the financial, the ability to recover money will have some impact on whether you want to pursue a force majeure claim that is not compensable. in terms of the schedules and analysis, this is certainly where Aegis can assist you with, but if you're doing it on your own, what you really want to understand is, does the project demonstrate what everyone believes to be critical? The critical path here in these types of claims is going to be essential to understand, again, and it will help you guide you in the decision whether or not you want to pursue a non-compensable time extension. You want to understand, this is always the case, you always want to understand where your critical path is, but now, again, more important than ever. You want to be able to develop you want to create well-developed fragnets. These are fragnets that relate specifically to the physical work and to the supply chain. Those will be different. There are several ways to capture these types of delays. What we are recommending is using an activity with extensive logic ties, one that would be related to each of the physical work and one to the procurement or supply chain. We recommend that the fragnets start with the notice letter when it's sent to the owner, but that's not how delay is measured. Delay is really measured by when the impact occurred. It's just in terms of documenting it. This is a good practice that a fragnet begin with notice. It's a good reminder that you should be sending these notice requirements, but ultimately you do not get awarded delay based on when you sent the letter to the owner. It's just a good guide in terms of how to create them.
One question that I get, Russ, quite often in the last week was, do we need to put a fragnet in? Won't the schedule show the impacts as is? And that isn't, it is true. If you don't put any fragment into the schedule will show by nature or virtue of lack of performance or lack of work, a delay to the overall project. However, if you want to be able to identify what the future impacts are going to be as this issue continues, that's where a fragment becomes essential, because in that you can change the production dates, the delivery dates, and when you think you're going to turn over various milestones. So it gives both you and the owner, or the owner and the contractor, the opportunity to see what the future and full impact may be as you best know it today.
Thank you. The other thing is, when you're making changes to your schedule, again, common sense, but get buy-in from your subcontractors. Don't just make changes based on your understanding of what you think will happen, but reach out to your subcontractors. They have their own limitations, their own issues that will definitely affect the project overall. That's always true, but right now their procurement and their labor issues may be very different than yours. So we want to understand, before we make changes to the schedule, really what their situation is. And it's important to document those assumptions, because they can change if you get to a situation where you said it was going to be, the expectation is something that's going to arrive in a few months. You want to understand that when you eventually put in a fragnet or eventually make a change to it that says, no, it's going to actually take much longer. So document the assumptions from the subcontractors and try to incorporate that information into your schedule. Also, as it relates to the schedules, you want to, our advice is that going forward, in the near term at least, you include a COVID-19 section. In terms of what this should look like, it should say the state of the current status of the situation. If there is something that the government has dictated, if there's certain laws that are preventing you from doing things, if there's just a general review of how this is impacting you and your project, but also identify specifically manpower, materials, and logistics, and how those are impacting you as a result of COVID-19. And lastly, and this is important, is what you plan on doing. What things are you looking at? This is not to say that they have to have happened in that particular schedule, but think steps you're doing. This is good best practice in general. However, if you do go to a dispute, it is a very helpful thing to say, we did all we could to help. We showed good faith here to try to do what we could to improve this project. We didn't just throw up our hands and suggest that we couldn't do anything. And we're going to go into mitigation here in a little bit in this presentation. But I think that should be part of the narrative. This is a very simple slide. The point of it is to say the filing of force majeure claim is the same as filing any other claim. This is, it's a much more serious impact. It's a much more serious event in our lives. but it follows the same process. Then it will be dictated by your contract. But typically, you give the notice, you insert the fragnets, perform the analysis, and then you submit a time impact analysis. It's the same process for COVID-19 as it is for any other impact. So what we also want to touch on is some of the things the questions you should be asking, some of the things you should be thinking about. One of is, are you updating frequently enough? Our recommendation in general is to do this bi-weekly, but we know most of our clients do it monthly. This is the time, and during this impact, where getting more data is better. If you are doing updates on a monthly basis, the timeliness of your information and the ability to make timely decisions is impacted. We recommend that this happens more frequently, but even if you're not, this is not the time to stop doing these updates. If you had been saying, oh, the project is generally progressing fine, I don't need an update, we get under control. We were doing updates and then we stopped a little while ago. It's this time to now resume them. It's the time to really make sure that the update process is happening. The data is going to be too important as we go forward in this process. The next is to even consider, do you want to file a force majeure claim? We mentioned this before, but really the critical path needs to dictate this, or should dictate this. It has certain contractual and legal ramifications by filing it, but beyond that, if you're a contractor and at this current point, the project is being impacted by an issue that's not COVID-19 and is the responsibility of the other party, that's time that is compensable. That's time that you are owed. And so this may not be in your best interest to give up the costs associated with your extended general conditions and other things just because it's something that you can easily point to. So this is not a decision that should be made lightly. I do suspect that most of the contractors will make this decision, and it would be the correct one. But to do force majeure, it should impact the critical path. That will still be the standard by which you're measured. If the critical path is going through some procurement or something administrative and it's not impacting your ability to perform the work right now, you will not be able to claim for force majeure, and it will not be in your best interest. I touched on this a little earlier before, but you want to show in this situation that you're performing in good faith. I mean, time is always of the essence, but you should be showing that you're doing whatever you can that is related to reaching the contract's goal. However, that does not mean you think you should do things that are unnecessary or have a cost implication. If you need to accelerate, that's not something that the contractor needs bear responsibility for. This is part of this process, and you make a claim or you go through the process of trying to get additional compensation for acceleration. Other questions we need to talk about or think about is really the health issues. It's again, the information, everybody is getting bombarded with this information, but it's going to have real impact on your project. Social distancing is a general concept, of course, but we're going to start to see, and have started to see, governments start to do real things about mandating this, requiring that in confined spaces, there's less than 10 people. You may have to work multiple shifts just to keep within these guidelines. We want to, of course, be sensitive to our labor force, and those will have impacts on productivity and on our ability to meet our contract substantial completion date.
So one item here that that would be very helpful for you ultimately would be to create, of course, a change order category or some cost category in which you can start tracking costs associated with this event. It would be very hard to start delineating costs between what was COVID-19 and what was general project after the fact. In fact, we find it's almost impossible to start doing these breakups. So to the extent that you have a sophisticated enough change order and cost system, which most of the people we work with do, this is the time to start tracking things in as much granularity as you can, especially multiple shifts, overtime premium, double premiums, et cetera. Go ahead, Russ.
Yeah, I mean, I put this presentation together in the last roughly 24 hours, but I've gotten 3 questions for which I had not originally considered. That's how fast this is moving. Someone asked me a question about OSHA and ability for workers to deny doing work because they have the rights to not do work that they deem dangerous. I don't know these answers. These are legal questions at this point. I got an interesting question about who's in charge of making the decision about shutting down a site. Is it the permit holder or is it actually the owner of the property? Interesting question. And then the movement of the government and legislation that's being passed is really shifting hour by hour right now. So these are questions that we're continuing to track, continue to make notes of, trying to become educated and understand what its ramifications are. But as we all know, this is moving really fast, and there's lots of things to consider here. So future mitigations. I want to really stress here, we talked about mitigation before, and that now is the time to do it. But when you're going into this process, we really want to see if we can mitigate this the best that we can. While disputes and claims are my business, we recognize that they are very costly and inefficient to contractors. They are a necessary evil in many cases to get the compensation for which you are deserving. But if you can avoid it, try to avoid it. That's always our advice. Work the problem, collaborate with your project team. We're all going through this, not just the contractors, but the owners. People, I hope, will be understanding during this time about what the challenges that you're facing. But it is, it's a business, and people treat it as such. So not everyone is going to be like, it's okay, it's COVID-19. But if we can collaborate with the project team, that's definitely in our best interest. In terms of the mitigation steps, the things that you should be looking at, ultimately you really want to optimize your schedule. I mean, that's the goal here, so that you can do everything you can to mitigate the problem. You want to look at things like, can you resequence? You want to see if there are logic ties or things in your schedule that can be improved, where you might have put them in just as a placeholder at some point, but now it's really time to review those and see, can you make improvements based on logic? You want to look at the crew flow constraints. If you in fact resequence something, are you able to meet that activity or perform that activity because of your crew flow constraints? Some of that would be just during regular times. So if you're doing some back-end logic and some back-end sequencing, and hopefully we're done with COVID-19 and its immediate impacts, you still may have crew flow constraints. Can you get that work done based on just the availability of labor in normal times? If you can resource load the schedule to understand the crews, that is certainly ideal. And really to look at your durations. In the beginning, when people are putting together schedules, we all understand it. They make some assumptions. They're not always based just on productivity calculations, which they should be, but they're just general placeholders. Let's look at our existing durations. Are they in fact reasonable? And also our future ones. Where did we put in some hidden float into that activity? Is it really 10 days, or can it be done in 7? Things like that. Again, this goes towards avoiding any claim is one part of it, but if you can finish the project earlier, let's say COVID-19 delays us by a month, but you can finish it only 2 weeks beyond your substantial completion date, your financial exposure is now limited by 2 weeks. So we want to take all the steps possible to do our best to get off the project as soon as possible. That's always true. Time is money, but in this case, you really want to take a closer look and see what you can do to avoid these issues.
Project control standpoint, Russ,
yeah.
This is a good opportunity to take a copy of your schedule, multiple copies of the schedule, and start playing with acceleration plans. What happens if we do this? What happens if we do this? You can make as many copies and acceleration plans as possible, put money to those plans, and set those acceleration plans aside, saying, we might do this one looks good, or this one looks good. But rather than try to figure it out after this is all over, right now, while we have an opportunity and construction is a little bit slow, we afford ourselves the time. We really sit down and we think about what a good plan would be, what the cost of those plans would be, and we figure out what the mitigation strategies would be. this is a really good opportunity right now to do that.
Great. That essentially concludes the actual schedule pieces. Just my own final thoughts here about what we're seeing here. My expectation is that this is going to be a deep impact, but it will not be relatively, put that in air quotes, long, but rather short-lived. I think that's going to be due to several factors. One is just the nature of what we're understanding about it. About COVID-19, but governments are being aggressive both in terms of containment measures and also policy support. As I mentioned, there's legislation that's trying to be passed currently as we speak here. And typically, every contractor is different, but as an industry, we tend to lag these kind of financial recessions by 12 to 18 months because of our backlog. But what we really are expecting, because it will be short-lived, there may be some projects that are being delayed right now because of the situation. Maybe you're going to build it, next month. You may push that out a couple of months. That there's going to be some things on the sideline, but that we're going to have a very strong recovery. So those projects will start up. Everything is going to sort of start up all at once. But also, we do anticipate that there's going to be a lot of acceleration on a lot of projects. So people are going to everybody's going to want to, get access to labor at the same time. And so that will spur a pretty strong recovery as well. We also, just based on our time in the industry and what we're seeing, our expectation is this is going to be an impact similar to what happened in September 11th, as opposed to a long-standing recession that was based on some real economic fundamentals like we saw in 2008 and 2009. So we believe it's based on an external event, and that it'll be deep. We're already seeing that, but short-lived. Here's some information about how to contact myself and my department. But really, if you're already a client of Aegis, I mentioned this before, the point of contact can also just as easily be the people you work with on a day-to-day basis. They're the ones who can help you with the schedules. If you have a question specifically about risk or dispute, you can certainly contact me, and we'll, I believe that was posted on the chat, my email address. And that concludes it. Really stay healthy and stay safe.
I just want to thank everyone for joining us. We ran out of time here. We had exactly the mark. If you have any questions, please email Russ at risk@consultaegis.com, or you can always direct any emails or questions to me, David Hatwell. Thank you for your time today. You all have a great afternoon.
All right, thank you, everybody.